Okay, so hopefully the folks online can see this now too. So the way we're going to do this, I've got a couple of talking points I'm going to go through to start with, then just explain how the evening's going to go. Then I'm going to go through the zoning ordinance page by page, and then after that we can take questions on specific areas, anything you want to ask about.
If they want more copies, we have some up here.
Sure. If anybody didn't get a copy, there's some up here. Yep. I'm Carl Lindquist. Sorry, I'm the planning board chair. Okay, so like I said, I'm Carl Lindquist, and we've also got Laura, who's our town attorney. So as questions come up tonight, probably most of them will go to me about, why we wrote what we wrote. But if there are questions about, is something legal, or is there a general practice in New Hampshire about zoning ordinances, then Laura will take the harder questions. As I mentioned, we're also doing this on Zoom, so we're going to balance any questions that come in through the chat there with questions that you folks have here. Ground rules. So we're here to discuss the content of the zoning ordinance, comments and critiques of that. This isn't should we have zoning or should we not question. If you really feel like we just shouldn't have zoning flat out, then there's not much to contribute about the zoning ordinance itself tonight. So that's what we want to talk about. If you really don't want zoning, then you just don't vote for the zoning ordinance. I mean, that's all there is. We're trying to do the best we can to come up with an ordinance that meets what everybody needs. Basic rules of a meeting, no offensive language. We're not pointing fingers at any person. We try to keep the questions to 5 minutes as you come up here. And if the same question's already been brought up and answered, then let's give everybody time. Let's not keep bringing the same thing up over and over again.
Carl, can you speak up a little bit for people online?
Sure. Stay back here a little more. And one point I guess I'll make about the zoning ordinance is there are some people in this room that are going to say this zoning ordinance is too much, and there are other people in this room that are going to say it's not enough. Okay, so that's where we are. So in my mind, that's the middle ground that we as a planning board are trying to achieve. It's not all of one way or all of the other way. The town has asked us by the votes in the past to do this, to create a zoning ordinance. And so that's what we've done. And it isn't all things to all people, but we think it's a reasonable balance. I'll give you a little detail as we go about what other towns around us have, and you can make your own decisions as we go. Okay, so the background, the ETZ was voted in. During this time, this 3 years or so that we have had zoning under the ETZ, there have been 20+ building permits that have been applied for and all approved. So nobody that has applied for a building permit in the last 3 years has been rejected. Okay, I know that was a big discussion at the front. Early on, should we have zoning or not? Well, everybody's going to tell me I can't do what I want to do. Well, these are the facts of what the last 3 years have had. If you went through the process, you got the permit. There were 3 that had some, that weren't just immediate. I think one was a house, an outbuilding structure adding a number of apartments, so there were some contingencies around that. One was waiting on a property merger, and one needed some clarification on setbacks, but at the end of the day, everybody was approved. We did some work on the master plan, so we contracted with North Country Council to do the surveys that you all saw and hopefully participated in to get a sense of where the town is today, in terms of your wants and how people feel about where the town should be. One of the things that we talked about before, and I'll mention again, that the results were remarkably similar to a past survey many years ago. People want a rural town. They want some small businesses like we've got in town right now. They want that to continue. So the responses were not carbon copied, but remarkably similar in terms of where people are. So it certainly appears that you know, as residents, we haven't drastically changed our view on what we want this town to be. I'll mention just for reference as we go through the document, you'll see RSA, so revised statutes noted. These are the New Hampshire laws. So anytime you see that in the zoning ordinance, this is a reference to an existing New Hampshire law that's applicable to that section of the zoning ordinance. Okay, so here's our town and some towns around. So the ordinance that you have in your hands, or that we'll go through tonight, is 22 pages total. And 9 of that is boilerplate from FEMA about flood zones. Okay, so we've got 13 pages, including a title page and a table of contents. So it's pretty slim. Bethlehem, 74 pages. Jefferson, that's the town that we felt we were most similar to. They're at 29, so you know, that's where we came closest to. Lancaster, 38. 4 of those pages are about signs. I'll talk about that in a minute. Littleton, 82 pages. Whitefield, Little Whitefield, 92 pages. Okay, so that's all the towns around us where they're coming from.
Forward, there's still a little bit of issue with sound online, so we're gonna try having stuff probably forward past the motion, see if that helps.
It's not loud enough for them?
Some people are having too loud, some people are saying it's not loud enough, so we're
Okay,
gonna try to step it a little bit further away from the mic and see if that helps.
let's try that. Okay, and this is something I think we've all got in our mailboxes over the last week or two. And I just wanted to take this opportunity, this point that I've circled, that the zoning is forever. It's not. Okay, that's completely false. The box I have down below is the truth, and we can talk to our town attorney if you want. So zoning is enacted by the town vote. So that's the only way we get zoning, is when the town votes on it. Zoning can only be changed by a town vote. So it doesn't happen in the middle of the night that suddenly there's a whole new section in there. It happens if it gets proposed as a warrant article, and we vote on it like everything else at town meeting. Okay, that's the law, that's the way it works. And if at some point zoning, the people of the town say we don't want zoning, it can go by town vote. Okay? So there's no middle of the night stuff here. There's no forever stuff here. This is the truth. Okay, so I just want everybody to understand that. It's easy to print something on a page and send it out, and people think, well, okay, that must be true, but I want to make clear it's not. Okay, so that's the end of my comments at the beginning. Now I'll step into the zoning ordinance itself, and we'll walk through that. Better on audio online? Okay. All right. Okay, good. Okay, so we'll go through the ordinance, and I should also say, if nothing changes tonight, then this is what would move ahead. We already know of at least one edit, so based on that, there will be a follow-up meeting to this, probably 2 weeks, we'll figure out the exact date. But any other edits that we make tonight, if people have a strong opinion and we look at it and say, yeah, we missed that, we should have done that, then certainly we'll make those changes, and we'll have another meeting in 2 weeks that would then allow us to move forward. Okay, table of contents for what's in here. So we referenced in the preamble the master plan, the survey that we did in 2021. As I said previously, many are effectively unchanged from 2011 master plan. Dalton is a rural residential town, should remain so in the future. Central rural character and quality of life defined by town's natural resources. Largely a community of single-family homes. This should remain the core of our future development pattern. Encouraging forestry, agriculture, recreation, tourism-related activities. Businesses, home-based cottage industries are part of Dalton's heritage and should continue to be encouraged. Limited commercial and industrial development may be good for the town in order to diversify tax base, if appropriately cited and accompanied by information from the applicant showing no foreseeable undue hazards. Dalton's town center, where we are now, a municipal building, etc., has the potential to become more active and vibrant. It may be appropriate to encourage development in this area. Dalton property owners must be able to count on full protection of their property rights. Any future land use regulations must fully respect and protect how Dalton's residents and property owners are currently using their land, subject to health, safety, and nuisance considerations. Okay, so here's our first RSA reference. So this is talking about within the state, how zoning ordinances, what they mean, how they're utilized. Town consists of one zoning district, rural residential, and one overlay district, floodplain, as defined by FEMA. So floodplain is, just to our right, out along the river. Provisions of the ordinance are intended to regulate the use of land for the purpose of protecting public health, safety, convenience, and general welfare of the residents of Dalton. Ordinance is adopted in order to implement the master plan and other policies designated to promote orderly growth and preserve the character of the town of Dalton. Among other purposes, this ordinance is specifically adopted to ensure life safety, standards of the state are maintained, preserve air and water quality, protect life and property from flooding, conserve open spaces and agricultural resources, protect natural and scenic resources, provide for recreational needs, preserve historic sites, ensure that development is commensurate with the character and physical limitations of the land. So another question that has come up is, the sense that zoning is incredibly rigid. Well, there are some rules, but as we're saying here, it does have a mechanism to allow some flexibility. If a landowner has a proposed use that does not exactly meet the zoning ordinance as written, the landowner has the option to apply for a variance with the Zoning Board of Appeals. So if you look at what you want to do and it doesn't show up exactly as written, it doesn't mean you can't do it. Okay? That's not the way this is written, is not the way anybody has intended it. You just have that step, just go to the Zoning Board of Appeals and say, hey, I want to do this. It's very similar to what you've written, but it's slightly different. Can I do that? And one of the things the Zoning Board of Appeals has as their guiding compass is the intent of this document. What does the master plan say? What do other guiding things say about what the town wants? And if it's pretty clear that it's in that scope of what the town wants, then they should work towards coming up with a way for that to go. That's part of what is the major guidance for them on how they make their decisions on should we grant this variance or not. Number 4, as we talked about before, the zoning ordinance is a living document that can be modified in the future by town vote. If anybody wants to see it later, I can pull up any of those local towns, their documents, and you can see enacted in Lancaster, I think, enacted 1956, amended 82, amended 86, amended 88. These are all things that have come along over time I mentioned they had 4 pages of sign ordinance in Lancaster. I don't think they had any to start with, but they had issues along the way and decided, and you can see where those amendments come in. So that's why we say it's a living document. Okay, so then we've got a couple pages of definitions. I'm not going to read through all these, but I'll just slowly scroll. Okay. Rural residential district usage. The proposed use shall not cause hazard to health, property values, or safety through fire, traffic, unsanitary conditions, or through excessive noise, vibration, odor, or other nuisance features. The following uses are allowed without a zoning permit from the select board, provided they comply with required setbacks and all appropriate state and federal regulations. So this list, if we had zoning tomorrow, is the stuff that you can just go out and do. You don't have to come to see anybody about it if you meet the requirements here. So you want to put up, buy a temporary carport and put it up in your driveway. Go ahead. You want to put up a hoop house, greenhouse, go ahead. You don't have to talk to anybody. Decks, porches, patios, go ahead. There's no requirement to come see the town for a permit to do that. Fencing, same thing. Non-residential buildings less than or equal to 200 square feet. So this is the shed. Question?
In your allowed uses, it says temporary carport. In your definition, it says temporary no more than 120 days. So your carport can only stay there for 120 days?
Temporary, we can talk about that. That's a good point. Temporary carport, meaning something that you purchase, right? You order it, it shows up. So that's certainly a valid point, and we'll talk about that later. But you understand what we mean here by temporary carport. Non-residential building less than 200 square feet. So you want to build a shed that's 10 by 20? Go ahead. Don't come here to get a permit because you don't need it, okay? Home-based businesses that involve consulting type businesses. No customers patronizing the business at its location. Go ahead and do that. If you're working remotely or something like that, there's no reason to come here for any permit.
Question?
Okay, I'll just remind you that I'll take this, but I want to get through it and then we can come back to questions. Go ahead, Pam.
Don't you believe that's pretty exclusive and restricted to just allow a consulting business with no patrons on premise and no signs of a business?
So I'm going to answer this one and then we're going to keep going without questions. So we're not saying no other businesses are allowed in town, right? This is in the freebie section. The no permit required, just go and do it, right? So that doesn't encompass every business. That's why it's written that way. Home-based daycare, small farm stand, logging, forestry, agriculture, animal slaughter regulated by RSA 427. So those are the freebies that you just go out and do, okay? These are the things that we do on a regular basis. I need to build a woodshed, go ahead and build it, okay? Then we get into the next section. So these are the items that need a permit. Doesn't mean you can't do them, just means you need to come in, just like people have been doing over the last 3 years, and say to the town, I want to build a house, I want to put a mobile home on, what do I need to do? Here's the process. So these require a permit, building a house, mobile home, duplex, addition to your house, garage, barn, shed, outbuildings greater than 200 square feet, home-based businesses that meet the following criteria. So the business is clearly secondary to the use of the property as a residence or ADU. So if somebody lives there, the home-based business, you live there and you have a shop or you do something else there. That's the intent. Business shall not substantially alter the outside appearance of the property. No objectionable effects resulting from home-based business such as, but not limited to, excessive noise, traffic, dust. So this is about, you know, what your neighbors perceive as you do this, that you still live there and you've got a side business going on. You've got many of those in town right now. They all continue, and if you want to do another one, you can do that. You come to the town, just like all the folks that have done over the last 3 years, and say, this is what I want to do. Next section, so these are permitted only by special exception from the Zoning Board of Appeals. So you want to do these things, you need to come to the Zoning Board of Appeals and request that, and they look at this, they look at the intent of the zoning ordinance, they look at whether you meet the criteria that have been set out, and then they can make a decision. So small commercial business, this is one edit that needs to be made. We've got 5 to 25, this should be 1 to 25. And the proposed use shall not cause hazard to health, property values, etc. The second category is accessory dwelling unit. So this is a state, there's a state requirement around some of this that you want to have, you want to call it an in-law apartment or a rental apartment, you know, another apartment on your property, whether it's in your house or as a separate unit, that you can do that. Just, you need to get this signed off. There's a note there, number 5, see Appendix A. After the text in the document, there's an Appendix A that just has that same information in a table form, if that's easier for people to look at. And then number 6 is more discussion about that special exception. So this, something goes to the Zoning Board of Appeals, and the question for them of whether to grant a special exception or not is the proposed use one that's permitted by this ordinance as a special exception? The specific site is an appropriate location and of adequate size for that? The applicant can show compelling evidence that the use will not and cannot be reasonably foreseen to cause noise, traffic, pollution, etc. And the proposed use will be in keeping with the stated purpose of this ordinance. So this document, the preamble at the beginning, the work that we did with the master plan, that's all guidance for the Zoning Board of Appeals on what the town wants. That's why we did it, to get your feedback. If the town said, we want a lot of rental apartments, that would be commented in there. It wasn't. People in town want single-family homes. That's the big piece. So this is the guiding doctrine for the Zoning Board of Appeals. Number 7, the variance. So this is everything else. So we've talked about the freebies, we've talked about the items that need a permit, the items that need a variance or a special exception. The variance is everything else. So if there's something else that you want to do that isn't described at all in the document so far, then you need a variance. Doesn't mean you can't do it. Just means you need a variance, you need to go through that process and get that granted by the Zoning Board of Appeals. Multi-unit developments, manufactured housing parks, subject to all applicable provisions under this ordinance, including state and area regulations. Developer must have responsibility to develop and maintain, repair everything until the town has properly received and accepted the responsibility. Lot size 2 acres, only one dwelling per lot unless an ADU or multi-unit development has been approved. Setbacks, 50 feet, 20 and 30. There are obviously state regulations around well and septic setbacks. Frontage, 200 feet. Height, 35 feet, 2.5 stories, with exceptions of silos and barns for agriculture, communication towers, wind energy systems. Site considerations. So in the interest of public health, safety, and welfare, all construction shall ensure the following. Soils are reasonable to build on. The slope, when cleared and graded, may not alter the natural drainage and won't promote flooding of neighboring land. Septic system effluent may not leach through non-filtering soil into a river. Accessory dwelling units. So this is an ability for people to make some extra money if they want to build something and rent out, or if they have in-laws that they want to stay on the property with them. There's a number of different reasons for it. So this is the description about what an ADU is and what the process is to get it. ADUs shall comply with all the development standards for single-family house, including but not limited to setbacks, height limitations. Maximum size shall not exceed 1,000 square feet. So we're not looking to build a second house on the property. This is more like it's either a part of your house or you're going to build a small cottage or cabin, but it's not a full-size second house. ADU may be attached or detached. You still got to do water and sewer according to state requirements. Only one ADU per property. Sale and ownership of the unit. So you can't sell it. You can't build that and sell that one cottage on your property. You own the property. You can rent it, but you can't sell it. Okay, so existing uses. You want to call it a grandfather clause. Everything that's out there on the day prior to zoning goes in, and then zoning happens. So what happens? Nothing. Okay, everything stays the way it is. If it's something that doesn't meet the current zoning requirements, but you keep using it the way it is, and you don't change anything, nothing changes. If you want to make it bigger or more non-conforming, that's a problem. But if it's a house that's too close to a road or whatever, and so the setbacks aren't met, nothing changes there. You'd still live in the house. So all uses legally existing as of the date of the adoption may continue despite non-conformity with the requirements of the ordinance. No non-conforming use may be changed to another unpermitted use without a variance. No non-conforming structure may be expanded in such a way as to increase the non-conformity without a variance. So again, it's possible if you want to do something that is against the zoning ordinance, but you need to come to the town and talk about it. Any and all non-conforming property which is partially or totally destroyed by reasons of obsolescence, fire, or act of God may be restored, remodeled, or operated if within 2 years, provided, however, that proximity to a lot line, etc., is defined in this ordinance. So if something burns and it sits for 5 years, you can't rebuild it the way it was if it was non-conforming. But if within 2 years you say, hey, I'm fixing that, I'm going to rebuild it back up, you can rebuild it just the way it was, even if it's non-conforming. Okay, so there's a lot of ability here for you to keep doing what you're doing and to repair things like that. You can't make it bigger. You can't make things more non-conforming. But there's quite a wide range of grandfathering capability. The floodplain ordinance. So we move that to the Appendix B in the end of the document. We'll talk about that in a minute. Zoning permits. To ensure compliance with the ordinance, all new construction must obtain a zoning permit, so that is essentially not any different than it's been in the last 3 years. There'd be an application, you come to the select board and say, here's what I want to do, here's the map of the property with setbacks and other relevant information, and they'll make a decision. Either they can decide based on what you have, or they may have extra questions. No zoning permit shall be required for any repairing, renovation, or rebuilding of any existing structure which does not and will not violate this ordinance. So you need to put a new roof on your house. Go ahead. No zoning ordinance shall be permitted for requirements on Article 4, Section 2, so those are the freebies that we went through. Subdivision review, so this is what we have today, and we had even before ETZ. That's part of what the planning board does. If a property is going to get subdivided or merged, all those parts that we were involved with. So nothing changes on that front. So whenever a subdivision is proposed, and prior to any contract, offer for sale, rent, condominium, conveyance, or lease, the subdivider or its authority agent shall apply in writing to the planning board for approval of the subdivision. So we've been doing those for decades. Enforcement, so the zoning ordinance shall be administered and enforced by the Board of Selectmen or its designee. Shall administer this ordinance and shall have the power to permit any land use or buildings which is not in conformance with this ordinance. If any violation of this ordinance occurs, the Dalton Select Board shall institute in the name of the Town of Dalton any appropriate action, injunction, or other proceeding to prevent, restrain, correct, or abate such violation. Penalties, so there are penalties already specified in the state, RSA 676, 15, and 17. Zoning Board of Appeals, so this is a pretty key part of all this. You know, we set out the zoning ordinance and these different pieces to it. Some of it, as I mentioned, the Zoning Board of Appeals, so this is a 5-person board with up to 5 alternate members who are appointed by the Dalton Select Board. May upon application take any action authorized by another RSA 674. So we currently have a Zoning Board of Appeals. And so they are in place. They have not had anything for the last 3 years, I think, but they're ready to serve as needed. Amendments, same clause and effective date. This ordinance may be amended with the provisions of RSA 675, so it can be changed, right? It's not set in stone, it's not forever. The invalidity of any provision of this ordinance shall not affect the validity of any other provision. So if there's an error in some place, it doesn't negate the whole zoning ordinance. And the ordinance shall become effective immediately upon its passage. So that's the document. Now we have Appendix A, which is restatement of some of the things that we wrote out in sentences earlier. We thought it might be helpful for some people to be able to see it in this way. Column on the left, these are the go ahead and do it, allowed without a permit. Second column over, you need a zoning permit. Third, special exception. And fourth, the variance is anything not already described. And then Appendix B is the floodplain. I guess if anybody really wants me to go through this, I can. I think it's pretty boilerplate. Any sense from folks here whether they want to go through it? Okay. No hands. All right, so that, I'll just scroll to the end so you can all see. And that's it. So, thanks for bearing with me through that. So now we'll open up to questions, folks here that want to speak, and Carl, whenever you have any questions from the chat, let me know. Okay.
There's a comment from Scott, but I think we can maybe give a couple people one question first, and then we'll read some things.
Sure. Okay, and I'll just ask, standard procedure, you come to the microphone, say your name and where you live.
My name is Gordon Job. I live on Ridge Road, Dalton. Over the last 3 years, I've attended, 3 or 4 of these meetings having to do with zoning. Invariably, someone stands up and says, I don't want the town telling me what color I can paint my house. I've listened to the presentation, went through the ordinance. Maybe I missed it. Where in it does it say the town can tell you what color you can paint your house? Nowhere. Thank you.
Okay, Pam Kathan, Harriman Road, Dalton. You've got over 24 RSAs and subsections listed. How are people going to go over this in 2 weeks' time and understand what each RSA, how it affects your ordinance? I mean, that's just an amazing amount of information. I don't think anybody should vote on this until everybody is aware of how this is going to affect them personally. I just don't know how we survived for all these years without zoning. I'm not sure how zoning is protecting my rights as a resident. I see how it's telling me how to do my rights as a resident. Your Appendix A reads anything not described. That's pretty vague and open-ended. You should be defining everything, not just lumping it together. Home cottages, I have no problem with home cottage industries, but does that bring any money to the town, the tax base? No. I haven't heard any positive input.
Pam, sorry. So if you want me to answer these, maybe we'll go one by one. You ask the question, but
Okay. How are you going to deal with all the 24 plus RSAs and subsections for explaining?
so today, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there are certainly hundreds and probably thousands of RSAs that, regardless of zoning, affect what we do. So that's the expectation of the state today, right? That you know, if you're going to put in a septic system, you can't just do it. If you're going to drive on the road, all these things. So that's all out there and all possible that you can be cited for not doing that. That's just the way the state is. I've called out the ones that are specific to zoning, which is a very small subset of the total.
But it has a lot of information and does not,
Sure.
are not clearly defining what the RSA means to that.
Yeah, sure. So but that's part of what we as citizens, the requirement is, the state didn't give me a choice. I moved here, and I am now subject to everything they have in many of those books like Laura had. Any state has that same situation.
So zoning won't have any impacts on the so-called.
Could we just go through the questions you had there?
Okay.
So what was the second one?
Will zoning have an impact on junkyards and messy yards?
No, the next question you asked. I don't want to just get into a big
Home
loop here.
cottage industries?
Sure. So
Not bringing any tax relief to the town?
okay, that's fine. So what we heard in the earlier master plan and what we heard in the recent one is people want the town to stay the way it is. And that is primarily what we have in the town right now for businesses. Not all, but it's a lot of the businesses that we have in town. And yeah, they're not huge, but that's what we have. And that's what the people have said. We like it the way it is. So that's what we have reiterated here, that the town said we should certainly encourage these kind of businesses to continue.
However, that does not bring any tax relief. What are you suggesting for suitable jobs?
That's
Businesses?
what the question is why we talk about it in here, and that's why. Okay, so from the zoning approach, we're not focused on taxes because that is not what the town has told us in the feedback that we've asked for.
Okay.
So
What are the fees for the permits?
So, Pam, like, make this the last question for now so we can get through other people. If you have more questions, you can ask later, but we're
Has it
trying to
been like
decide.
5 minutes?
It's been more than 5 minutes, yeah. I've got a timer over here.
Speaking as well, so is this all about zoning, all about Casella, you're trying to figure out, just to be honest?
Where we don't have any reference to a landfill in there, because that's
You
not
don't
what
have
we,
to come out and say it. You do reference it,
we don't reference it.
not verbatim.
Okay,
That's all I gotta say.
okay,
Thank
thanks,
you for
Pam.
your time.
In the middle row?
And I'd just like a little more explanation of 4B accessory dwelling units. What exactly are you saying we need a permit for? And did whoever did this, did they consider making exceptions for actual families? Say like your kids. I know you mentioned mother-in-law. I just want to know, for instance, what can't you do? Can you put up a wall in your house and say that's my mother-in-law's space or my kid's space? I mean, obviously, if you have an extra bathroom, you put that wall, you can give them that. But I'm not 100% sure.
Two mics at the same time.
I guess if you could just do that, I appreciate it.
Sure.
You understand my point?
Yeah, so this is the section, accessory dwelling units, so this has been a topic in the state, I think, for some time, and the question of, you know, there's obviously a gray area between, hey, my kids are back home, they're living with me now. Sure. And so I think there's a level between your family's kind of back together and, hey, we need like a separate dwelling unit for somebody that needs their own space. Could be inside, could be outside, either one. And so that's what we said, that yes, you absolutely can do that either way. And it's, there's some distinction between, making sure that, for example, most of the septic system requirements are based around number of bedrooms. So if you're adding a bedroom, so those are things that would need to be considered to say, does our current septic system handle that, or do we need to expand?
Is that mostly the concern, would you say, that you need to, with that state?
That's a state requirement.
Is that mostly whoever decided this or all of this?
Yeah, again,
Concern?
yeah, there's quite a bit of writing in the state about, why and what. Right, yep. And it's, it's about workforce housing, it's about family, being able to take care of elders, it's about, all those things are kind of wrapped into one. So there's a lot to read there that I think will be helpful. Yep, 674, 71 to 73. Sure. Okay, so we've got a question online from Adam Finkel. Small business you want to run out of your house. This is very clearly one of the many uses that does not require a permit at all. If somebody wants to hire up to 5 employees outside the home, outside the family, that might require a permit. Just please set the record straight. So that's the comment from outside. Anybody else here that has a question? Sure.
James Ishwood, Harriman Road. My question is related to the section on fees. Do we currently have fees on the permits, or have they been established yet? And if so, or in the future we establish a fee, would that be a town vote to set the fees, or is that something the select board would be doing?
So the question for those online was about fees for building permits and anything related. For the select board, current fees for building permits are 0. Okay, so that's something that can be adjusted over time. Laura, is that something?
So state law gives the selectmen the authority to set fees for things like zoning permits, provided town meeting has voted to give them that authority. There are provisions in the statute that say those fees can't be any more than what it actually costs to process the permit. So they can't put like $1,000 fee on a building permit. So yes, the selectmen can do it. I believe it requires a public hearing, so there would be some input.
Sorry.
Okay, sure, come on.
Eric Pilotte, 40 Simons Road. I was wondering, where does the money come from the building inspector? Does it come out of this or the taxpayers?
So the question is, the money for building inspectors. So there is no building inspector.
It ain't legal. Someone's gotta check out and see if the studs are on there right, the hurricane braces,
So,
so we can sue Twin Mountain and Method. Thank you.
so I guess the general comment on that is it follows all the RSAs and in some cases federal building requirements. So those all need to be met. There's a state building requirement.
James Mern, I would like to see under Article 4, dimensional requirements, number 2, setbacks, all be revised to 10 feet from the right-of-way or property lines. And then under number 4, the height, exceptions. After exceptions include, provided the setback to the property lines exceed the structure height for those that the restriction does not apply.
Could you reiterate the height comment you made?
Yeah, my concern is that if you had a tall wind structure, that if it fell, it would be at least the distance from the property line that the structure is high. So after exceptions say, provided the setback to the property lines exceed the structure height, this restriction shall not apply to silos, barns, towers, or wind energy.
I understand what he's saying. He wants a fall zone.
Right.
Yeah.
Is that, I don't know if that's, sorry, if that's part of a state reg now on wind towers?
Small Wind Energies does have its own statute. There is a reference to a fall zone. I believe it's 150% of the height. I don't know off the top of my head whether that's automatically applicable or that is authority for the town to adopt it, but there is reference in the state statute to a fall zone.
Okay, thank you. Is there one in the back?
Sarah Dunn. In regards to the Whitefield, we actually, Whitefield does not have zoning. It's a Whitefield comprehensive guide. There is no zoning in Whitefield. And the other thing I wanted to know was lot size, 2 acres. You're not allowed to build on that. Is that what you have in your zoning?
Right, so 2 acres is the minimum.
So if it's anything under 2 acres, you're not allowed to build on your own property.
That's right. There is some commentary about grandfathered pieces. We know there's some odd pieces in town, so if you currently own a 1.5 acre piece or 1 acre piece and zoning were enacted tomorrow, you could come in and say, hey, here's the situation. This was a legal lot when I bought it, and so...
Somebody coming in from out of town buying under 2 acres wouldn't come into town and buy that land now because they can't build on it.
No, the lot was legally existing. If zoning goes in tomorrow, the lot is legally existing, so if you own it, you can build on it. If somebody else buys it, they can build on it because it's a legal existing lot. There would need to be, a variance based on that, saying, but it would go into the grandfather clause. Does that?
But just to be clear, you would need a variance. If you have a lot that's under 2 acres and you want to build on it, you would need to come to the zoning board to get a variance to get permission to do that.
But if you've got that lot right now, it's not like nothing can ever happen to it again, it's just that's the process.
Thank you.
Thanks. Question in the back?
Hey, thank you for your hard work. I know this is a lot. My name is Chris here. I'm the CEO at Team O'Neill. I don't live in Dalton, but I live in Littleton. Obviously, we're worried about the non-conforming use. So what is the work in progress, or how are you defining what I started, or what is my work in progress, or what my future plans were for non-conforming use?
So Laura, this may be a good one for you. Chris, maybe you could give a little more detail on what you have so she understands the business.
So a future gravel pit on site, a future building, and a future potential like hotel or large residential.
I'm sorry, I was thinking in terms of your current business, so she knows what that is.
Oh yeah, so we performance driving school, over 600 acres next to Chick's Land.
That use could continue uninterrupted, unmolested. If you want to add a gravel pit, a hotel, and I don't remember the third thing you said.
I'm already working on those things as of right now.
Do you have a permit under the emergency temporary zoning?
I do not.
Then you would need a variance
I
of the sort
started
passed.
3 years before, it started before all the emergency zoning.
So non-conforming uses relate to the condition that is in place at the moment the zoning ordinance is adopted. So whatever is legally existing can continue. Whatever is not presently existing has to comply. It's an interesting question, what happens to work in progress? I don't know, but I can look that up.
Okay. Then, so just to be clear, anyone that has property that's non-conforming, that free list doesn't apply. Is that correct? Because you are expanding a non-conforming property. So if you have a non-conforming property and added a deck, you would still actually need a zoning variance. Is that true?
If it makes it more non-conforming.
It would make it no more non-conforming, correct?
If it's no more non-conforming, it's okay, it makes it more non-conforming.
So I just think that needs to be extremely clear, you know, if we could clarify.
Can you give an example, or you're particularly thinking about
so
a
like
house?
a house that's non-conforming wanted to add a deck, would that need a variance?
And non-conforming for what reason?
I just need to know setback.
So it depends on what the nonconformity is. If the house is nonconforming to the front setback and you want to add a rear deck, you're fine. If the house is nonconforming as to frontage or lot size, technically you're expanding the nonconformity. So that may require a variance. That's something we can talk about.
I'd like to see a lot more clarity on non-conformance, because that's an issue that we would be working with the town quite a bit, and so the more you can define upfront, I think the easier legal fees for everyone is just make it a lot easier if you have the time. And I appreciate your effort and everything. We look forward to working with the town.
Sure, thanks, Chris.
So much.
Yeah, I think some of those are certainly valid points. The challenge sometimes is how far do you go into describing all the possible scenarios? So that's a balance we're trying to strike. Thank you. Okay, question from online. If a business applied for a special exception and was denied, could it then apply for a variance? If the answer is yes, as I think it is, does that mean that the town, through the zoning board, would have 2 different ways to allow a business of any size to locate in Dalton and increase our tax base? Yeah, I agree.
If someone comes in for a special exception and it's denied because the special exception criteria are not met, there's 2 avenues. One, they can appeal that, or 2, they could come in and apply for a variance. A variance has different criteria, different standards. So yes, technically there's 2 ways to get a business. If you can't meet the special exception criteria, you can try to get a variance.
Okay, any other questions in the room? Okay, I think we we've got another one. Was the previous speaker correct that Whitefield has no zoning? Yeah, I can pull up the document, we can take a look. So it is titled as Development Code. Laura, I guess you can,
That's a zoning ordinance.
yeah.
And you can tell because it was adopted at town meeting.
And so in this particular case, we were talking about earlier, this was adopted in 92, amended 94, 96, 2019. So this is what it would look like as amendments get proposed and then enacted, they would get noted on the document. Okay, yeah, Pam, go ahead.
Okay. How would one adopt an ordinance, say, if you wanted to have all the houses painted the same color? How would that go about? Would somebody put in a warrant? Would it be voted on at town meeting? Or how would that work?
Yeah, so if that was the particular concern you had, you said, I feel like the town should all be painted white, then you would put a petition together to get a warrant article, it would go for the town, and it would get voted on, up or down. Is that right?
That would be the process. That's how a petition zoning amendment works. I would say that a zoning amendment regulating the colors of the house may or may not be legal. Every zoning ordinance needs a rational basis, and so someone would need to come up with a rational basis for that.
Well, Arizona has similar things like that.
Arizona has different laws than New Hampshire does.
I understand that, you know.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else in the room? Yep, Jim.
Doug Ingerson, Board Members Drive. I got a couple of questions, one for the town lawyer. Last year, just before we accepted special exception zoning, we lost by 5 votes. She stood up in front of everybody and said, listen up everybody, just because you got the special exception zoning will never stop your landfill. We have that on record. I have it at the moment.
I don't remember saying that.
I have it on record.
I will say that temporary zoning does not stop the landfill. The temporary zoning requires that the landfill get a special exception.
Well, I'm talking about zoning, not special exception, but.
Well, the special exception is part of zoning.
Yep. And the second part was, I presented a 1,400 acre industrial park the day before special exception zoning voted. It's in that closet right there. So I can put anything on my land, stands I was there before zoning? Have a nice day.
No. So the way zoning works in terms of its applicability, and I'm not entirely clear how this works with emergency temporary zoning, but with regular zoning, you have to comply with the zoning ordinance. And the way amendments work is amendments generally get discussed, debated, and finalized in the November-December timeframe. Once those are posted, once notice of the meeting of those are posted, you can't issue any permit that would allow a use that would violate that proposed zoning ordinance. You are protected from that if you have had a subdivision application that's been accepted or if you have previously been granted a building permit. So I don't know anything about the details of your application, but that's generally how amendments work.
2 years prior to that, I
a 75-acre industrial park. They stamped it and put it there 2 years prior to it.
Then you can probably build it. I don't know.
Exactly,
But
so these are the questions I was asking. So I came here the day before, right, of special acceptance zoning. And I put a 1,400-acre industrial park.
well, I don't know what you submitted or what was approved, so I would need to look at the actual documents to tell
It
you.
didn't have to be approved. There was no special exception zoning, no different than my drag strip, no different than my gravel pit, no different than my asphalt plant, no different than my industrial park, no
A
different than my
plan
house.
to have it doesn't protect you. You have to actually have it or actually have a permit. So if no permit was required,
We didn't have zoning.
I
built all
understand that.
stuff. I used to have a map here, I got a pen with the town, more taxes than anybody in town. I'm just asking, what do you have for question on that answer? It was before special exception zoning, just like the first 75 acres was, but the 14 doesn't matter, the 1,400?
What I am saying
Yeah.
is if the use was not in place before the emergency temporary zoning was adopted, and I mean in place, actively happening, then I don't think it's protected from zoning. But I don't know what you submitted. I don't know the details of this, so I would need to look at that in a lot more detail to answer that question.
That's good, that was the question, thank you.
So that could be 2-tier grandfather?
Well, it's not two-tier grandfathering. It's anything that was in place before the emergency temporary zoning was adopted gets to continue. So there's only one level of grandfathering. It's just your ordinance has sort of morphed over time.
But all these things we talk about in grandfathering are active uses.
Yes, generally speaking.
Okay, any other questions from the room? Yep, Chris.
What happens at 26 employees?
Sorry, could you come up again? Thanks.
My only other question, what happens at 26 employees?
So that's the
Is there a
piece.
fine, daily fine or something?
No, it's moving into, so I guess the question is, what you're asking, talking about a pre-existing use, or are you talking about a proposed use going forward?
Yeah, so say I, before zoning went in place, I had 24 employees and hired 2 more after zoning. So 26 employees is now not, I've turned a business into a non-conforming use. So what would my daily fine be?
So the answer to your question is $275 a day is the statutory penalty. The realism is that if it came to the town's attention that you suddenly had 26 employees, they would write you a letter and they would say, hey, we hear you have 26 employees. The maximum that's allowed in town is 25, so you need to come in and get a variance. Please do that. If you come in, you get your variance, no problem. No one's coming after you for any money. If you say no, then the town has the ability to bring an enforcement action, either in district court or in superior court, to A, require you to come into compliance, B, to seek those fines, which are discretionary with the court, and C, the town, if it prevails, would also be awarded its attorney's fees.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Yeah, Pam?
Can you get a variance for more, for say a set amount of people, like 10, you expect to hire 10 more people? Can you go in and get a variance for that?
Sure, you can come in and say, my business is growing, I think it's gonna be 35 people, I need a variance to hire up to 35 people, absolutely.
Okay.
Karen Locke, Bush Road, Dalton. And my question involves the master plan, because I remember Mr. Dennis talking last hearing that the town didn't have an active master plan and any zoning would be null and void if we didn't have that. The preamble makes reference to a master plan survey, and our last one being effective 2011. So I'm just curious about the status and the legality.
Sure, so I'll comment on the status and then maybe you could touch on the legality. So the status of the master plan is that last year we went before the town and asked for money to updated. That certainly was a valid point that Jim had, that the master plan hadn't been updated as recently as it should. So we contracted, we did a survey, I hope you got that and took part in it. There were many events at the different, town transfer station and some other places to get that feedback from people. So that was a 2021 activity. So we got that feedback from people. We have not fully finished the master plan as a document, but we have that information that we felt was most critical up front to be able to talk to the zoner. So I'll let Laura talk to the legality.
I was just going to ask, so with that answer, if this were voted in, it's null and void because you don't have a solidified master plan?
No. First, I'm not seeing anything in the statutes that actually requires a master plan before you adopt zoning, but I'm just looking at that real quick, so there could be something in there. But you have a master plan. What you don't have is a master plan that's been updated recently. The law recommends that the master plan be updated about every 10 years, so you're actually right on schedule to do that. Just because you don't have an updated master plan doesn't mean your zoning ordinance would be null and void. The purpose of the master plan is to help you write your zoning ordinance, right?
So I just have a great deal of respect for Mr. Dennis, and I wanted the answer to that question. The second question I have has to do with the zoning board and a select board. Are they two separate entities that there is no overlap of the population on one and the population on the other?
They are two separate boards. You can have one select person on the zoning board. That's up to the town whether or not you want to do that. I generally recommend against that because when the select board makes a decision interpreting the zoning ordinance, so if the select board were to deny a permit because it didn't comply with the zoning ordinance, that could be appealed to the zoning board. And if there was a select person on the zoning board, they couldn't sit on that appeal. So I generally recommend against it, but it is legal to have up to one select person on the zoning board.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question.
When do you think you'll update, finalize?
You want to come up, please, Pam?
Sure. When do you expect to update, finalize the master plan?
After zoning is through?
Okay.
Yeah, one way or the other. In June, that will be the next thing that we work on. Yep. Other questions in the room? Yep, come on up.
Good evening, my name is Scott Kleinschrodt, I live at 59 Bush Road. I'd like to begin by thanking this group for all the work they've done over the last 3 years to put this document together. I know it has been a lot of time, and I know it's been a lot of effort. I may not agree with a bit of it, but I do appreciate your time and effort putting it. I guess one of the questions I have, and it goes right to the preamble, Article 1, when you state Dalton's a rural residential community and should remain so in the future, and also Dalton's largely a community of single-family homes, and this should be the core of our future development pattern. By putting this at the very front, I guess my question is, how does this ordinance help diversify our town's tax base?
Okay, so that piece, those comments you had, those were some of the very specific ones that were in the 2011 survey and came right out front in the 2021 survey. This is what people are telling us is most important to them. So we put it right up front here. This is what you as citizens fed back through those surveys. There's no specific question in zoning about taxes. This is about the overall picture, and so that's the feedback that we took and that what we put in here.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to my initial question. Even though your group is not looking at the tax base, your group in putting this ordinance together is going to certainly affect the tax base. And my question is, again, how is this ordinance, if it passed and approved, going to help diversify our town's tax base?
So I I would say it's not directly going to. I would also say the people of the town that gave this feedback, the people that would care about that same question you're asking, Scott, they did not put taxes at the top of the list. So as the planning board, when we're looking at that information, we didn't artificially push taxes to the top because you, as people who fed back to us, you didn't say that. I understand for you personally, that's a primary issue. But as a town overall, that did not come up as a primary issue.
I guess it's not just myself who feels this is a primary issue. 10 years ago, when that initial master plan was done, I think many of us were probably not in the economic situation we are in now. We are continuing to see our taxes rise. We're continuing to see town services decline, and it's not going to be sustainable for many people. 8% of the town's population cannot afford to pay their taxes right now, and that's a fact. That comes right from Jesse Wentworth's office. And by putting an ordinance together, that will certainly do the opposite of diversifying our tax base. By discouraging businesses to come into town, by discouraging industry to come into town, it is foolhardy, and we will pay for this eventually.
Okay, thank you, Scott.
I'm not done. I have other questions.
Okay, I'd like to make one point and then you go on to your next one.
Okay.
I know the tax question has come up in town, and it's not part of this, but I'll maybe ask Joe Beth to reiterate the percentage of our taxes that we pay that comes from the town expenses is approximately?
The town's part is 20%.
20%. So 80% of the taxes that you and I pay doesn't come from the running of the town. That we have no control over. It's coming from the county and the school system. So I just want you to be clear on that, because it's really important. You know, it's easy to say, like, we should do more about taxes, but it's important to understand where those taxes come from and what drives them. Okay.
Sorry, go ahead, Scott. One thing we can do is we can encourage business and industry to come to this town. That would have an impact on our taxes. All you have to do is look at Monroe. All you have to do is look at the town of Carroll. They are property-rich towns because they have industry in their towns that help offset the tax base. That's a fact. I'm not making that up. And by creating an ordinance such as this, which does the opposite, again, is going to set us back in the future. I don't have a problem paying my property taxes. I do not. But I can't say that the town as a whole can say the same thing. And this is not a criticism of you folks. Please understand, I'm not criticizing you folks personally for this. It's a general comment that is a concern. But I'll move forward. I'll move on. Part 4 of your preamble says Dalton should continue to encourage forestry, agriculture, and recreational tourism-related activities and businesses. I guess, and you've heard me ask this question before, how many loggers do we have in town? I think I can count one. Chick Ingerson.
We've got a couple guys in their hands up there.
I said, where is the dairy farms in town? Where are the vegetable farms in town? Unless they may be there, I don't know. I see very, very little business activity around Forest Lake. There is no storefront on Forest Lake. I don't believe there's a hotel motel in town. Maybe there is, I don't know. And so by saying this is how we want to base our industry, when we have little of that around, is, again, it's wishful thinking. You know, we can say this is what we want to develop, but we don't have a whole lot of it going on right now. And again, that's a concern.
Scott, I would reiterate, we're not making this up out of whole cloth, right? We're getting as much feedback as we possibly can from the town. As I led with earlier, I don't think there's anybody in this room that loves every word in here, right? There are people that want more and people that want less. And so we're trying to balance the middle. When we looked at the feedback from the town that we've gotten, taxes does not come in at the top. I absolutely get that there are people that are struggling to pay their taxes and can't pay their taxes. We're trying to balance the overall input that we're getting, and when that doesn't even make the top 5, the feedback that we get, we're saying, okay, as a town, we're not going to make this a priority in the zoning ordinance. So I hear where you're coming from, but I just wanted to give you that background.
That's unfortunate, but obviously, this group as a whole, this is what you wanted to propose. I guess there's another question about unnecessary noise, odor, dust, things like that. Who's going to determine what's unnecessary noise? How are you going to do that? Because I know that's part of this, that whatever business may come into town, they can't do these things. Well, who's going to determine whether a company is making too much noise, or too much odor, or too much dust?
Yeah, and so Laura maybe can help with this, but I think it's pretty situational, right? Based on where that business is going to go in. If it's going to be on the road right here, well, we've got traffic right now, so it's probably not going to create more traffic. So, you know, that kind of example.
So the selectman would make the decision in the first instance when someone comes in to apply for a zoning permit. And then if it requires a special exception and they go to the zoning board would make that determination. And I know it sounds like a very ephemeral thing, but this is very standard language in every zoning ordinance in every town in the state, and they all manage it.
Sounds enough, again, I'm not taking offense to you folks, but it sounds pretty political. Because you're gonna have someone determining how much is too much noise. I might not think it is too much noise, but Jack next door might think it is.
And it's a reasonable person standard.
Odor, how are you gonna determine what is odorous? I mean, I think you're really going down a very slippery path. And one last thing, also when you're reducing the amount of employees a business could have to 25, where did that number come from? Where did you can't have more than 25 employees. Where did that number come from?
So we did our best to try to figure out what is reasonable for the town right now. We all live in the town. We talked about the businesses that we know and thought, okay, 25 seems like a reasonable limit based on town saying, we like things the way they are. That's the feedback we've gotten. So therefore, we should look at the businesses that are in town and make a judgment around that. I don't know for sure. I don't think there's anything in town that has 25 employees right now. If anybody here knows, they can correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, Chris, thanks. So that may be the one exception in town right now. So if there's a different number that we should use, let's talk about it. But we're trying to come up with something that seems reasonable.
I guess I don't know why you want to put a limit on that. And I think that also sounds like a lawsuit is waiting to happen. You try to tell business they can only have so many employees.
Well, like we talked about earlier, we're not telling them that they can't have more employees. There's a process if somebody gets over that. And if that number isn't right, if it should be 30, let's talk about it. Okay, so this is us taking the town feedback saying we want the town to stay the way it is. Okay, so what businesses do we have? What is a reasonable size that is approximately right? I'm sorry if I didn't get quite right to what you guys have now, but that's where we were coming from.
So that's going to attract a business to come in by limiting how many employees they can have?
So one thing I would reiterate for the folks here, pick a restaurant, you know, someplace that wants to come in, you know, that you wish the Domino's would come into town. Okay, so Domino's probably needs 3-phase power. They certainly need running water and septic and sewage, right? So if you tell them, and of course we don't have those, right? So this is not a zoning related thing. This is an infrastructure piece that the town doesn't have now. So if they come in, they're not even going to get this far, right? You don't have town water and sewer? No, that's not for us. So my piece, if the consideration for the town is we actively want to bring in more business, that's a big piece right there, right? That's setting the stage for the kind of businesses that you want to come in, if that's the kind of business you want. then we need town water and sewer. We need them to be able to set up shop and be able to do that. Well, without that, this is no meaning. They're not even gonna touch our town without that infrastructure stuff.
Again, this does not look like it's a business-friendly ordinance.
But do you understand?
It's certainly not a business-friendly ordinance.
Okay.
I do. You know, business is probably gonna want the infrastructure. We don't.
It's a big deal.
But there could be a business that doesn't need that infrastructure. And to them, they'll just take their, they'll get their own water, they'll take care of their own septic, just like we all have to do here in town.
Yeah.
It's just part of it.
Right, and I'm certainly not saying that every business needs that, but I think when many of us think about a business that we like to see in town, restaurant on Main Street, or whatever, these are significant pieces to it. Again, the concept of the feedback that we've gotten is, we like the town the way it is.
Well, you're getting some feedback tonight.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I had to come late. I was stuck in something I couldn't get out of.
No, and that's fine, but this is, we're 3 years in at this point, and this is the commentary we're getting now. I absolutely, you've got a right to your own opinion, and I appreciate that. I appreciate that you've given some feedback, but we haven't heard it from a lot of people that this is the piece that they need. The taxes is the piece that they need. We've heard other things, and so that's the way the zoning ordinance has been put.
As soon as Carol's leaves the school district and our taxes go up $4.81 per thousand, I think you might start seeing or hearing some things. Unfortunately, that might be after this has already been put through, and then we're stuck. See, this is gonna be far-reaching. This is gonna be far-reaching. This is gonna affect us in the future. Many of us may be gone when something really happens, and we can go back and say, you know what, 2022. We had an opportunity to help diversify our tax base, to help the town grow, and also be able to support its residents.
So Scott, what I would ask, we go to June, if zoning fails, then maybe you're happy, this goes away. If it passes, I would ask that you come on board and help us develop those pieces, because as I've showed you and Laura talked about, this is absolutely changeable. If we start and it gets approved and there's a strong feeling that we need another piece or we need a different viewpoint, then I would really like you to be here to help us to form that. Okay? I'm absolutely serious.
I guess I'd rather not have to change something we don't have. So thank you.
Okay. Well, thanks for hearing that, Scott.
Carl, can I just correct something I said earlier? I did find the statute that says you do need certain sections of the master plan before you adopt zoning. But as I said, you have that master plan. There's nothing in here that requires the updating. So I just wanted to correct that.
Okay, I've got one comment from online here regarding the issue of taxes. Is it true that there is nothing in the planning and zoning ordinance that discourages business and industry from locating in Dalton? Stated another way, any business or industry has an opportunity to file for and receive a variance or special exemption. Yeah, of course, that's true. So we've talked a few times tonight that if you don't find your specific usage in here, there is always a way to make an application, whether it's by special exception or variance, if it's not in it. So this is not a set in stone piece. You always have that option to make that case. The opposite of that is possible. With no zoning, the town would have no ability to negotiate with any business for more revenue. Yeah, question back.
French Road. How many questionnaires were sent out for the master plan, and what was the percentage of responses you got?
You give me a second. I think I've got my notes here. Let me look it up. to look that up, Christine. I have some notes here, but not that specifically.
Sheet here from Country Council says 108 people completed the survey.
So 108 people completed the survey.
But how many were sent out?
To the entire town?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know if we have, but that,
They weren't sent out, they were online.
No, they were sent out,
They
they
were
got
both.
in the mail.
yeah, so I can figure that out, so I don't know.
Would you definitely say maybe 500 or 600?
We send flyers to everybody with the log-on information, or they can contact the office directly.
Okay, well, we've got about 700 registered voters, give or take. There's a little under, or maybe around 1,000 residents in the town of Dalton, so figure maybe 700 to 800 households that were reached, and only 101 people responded. I've done a lot of studying on small towns all across this country, and apathy will be the death of small towns, and people not willing to participate and respond in a responsible manner to issues affecting their town. And I think this is a prime example. Everybody here cares, or they wouldn't be here. The 101 that responded care, or they wouldn't have. If their indication is that they don't want the town to change, it's not going to change. The taxes will go up, and Dalton will continue to exist as it has since, what, 1700 something. It just kind of bumbles along doing its own thing. It's 2022. The town cannot, in a positive manner, continue to go forward unless more residents start taking their responsibility for where the town is going. If they're gonna stick their heads in the sand, it's gonna continue along, and issues will continue as they have. People want tax relief, they wanna expand the base. Well, those people in mass have to follow the democratic process and get off their asses and vote and participate in their government. Those people that wanted, as your survey respondents indicated, wanted to stay stuck in the 1800s, that's exactly where it's gonna stick until taxes bite us. Dalton pays, in my opinion, a highly disproportionate school tax. The county taxes and fees we pay are astronomical. If people, the 100 and what percentage said we want to continue in this way, then they're gonna have to suck it up and pay those additional taxes. We've got maybe 100 kids in the school system, and we pay a horrific amount. Well, it's based on a formula. Well, the formula sucks for the town of Dalton.
Yeah, and I can't.
So I appreciate all of the work, my husband's on the board, that you
Sure.
have done. But I'm gonna say to the residents of Dalton who are not here, who did not fill out the form and voice their opinion, this is riding on your shoulders. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Christine. And I will certainly second some of your comments about, this town runs on a volunteer basis. And we've been meeting primarily twice a month for 3 years. And, we would welcome other folks to show up. We've had a few people come in on the Zoom, but mostly they don't. This is a challenge, in the town. That we're, in our case, the planning board, we're doing the best we can with the information that we have. It's not our role to decide on behalf of the town, this is where we think the town should go. We're trying to take the best guidance we can from the town itself. Pam?
Thank you. I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier about there would be some changes to this and that you have to have another meeting. Will that be a public meeting?
Yep, it'll be the same as this.
Votes on June 7th, does that give you time?
Yes.
To have a public meeting?
There's just barely time, yes. It has to be 14 days from today.
Okay, you have to notice.
10 days ahead of time.
questions here?
It's my understanding that if you have more than 25 employees, you have to file for a variance to get approved. Does this mean that the zoning board cannot turn that down?
No.
So they can turn anything down they want?
No. A variance has 5 statutory criteria that have been interpreted by the Supreme Court. If those criteria are met, the variance should be granted. If those criteria are not met, the variance should not be granted. And there's always an appeal process if you disagree with the zoning board's decision.
Question?
JNS Simons Road. I think this is a great opportunity to use a concrete example of when a variance would be granted or would not be granted for a business of more than 25 employees. And I think, tell me if I'm wrong, but if that was a business that was on a 2-acre lot in the middle of a residential area and it produced a lot of noise and it was going to have all sorts of cars coming and going, and they wanted to have 50 employees on that 2-acre lot, chances are that variance would not be granted. But if that business was, say, for instance, on a 600-acre lot in the middle of a mountain bowl, and they wanted to have 50 employees and the traffic wouldn't affect anybody, that's the kind of variance that would be granted. So the point of what we're trying to accomplish here is to protect people from things that ruin their quality of life. And I think the first example is one of those, and the second example is one where the variance would not be a problem. Don't build a Walmart on a 1-acre lot. If you could elaborate on this, that would be tremendous. I think it would help people.
I mean, I can give an hour-long class on variances and you'd all fall asleep, and I would probably fall asleep giving it. But basically what you have to show is that the proposed use will not alter the character of the neighborhood, that the proposed use won't diminish surrounding property values, that there's something unique about the property and the way the zoning ordinance affects the property, not the property owner, the property, that justifies the variance. So that's sort of a very condensed explanation of what you have to show to get a variance. So yes, I don't think you're far off in your 2 examples.
Thanks, Jay. And I think a related point is for everybody in this room, in this town, zoning is a completely new thing. But every town around us, every other state in the country, they've been doing this for decades. And so these things that feel very strange to us, like, oh my gosh, what about this? What about this? It's not set up as a gotcha. It's not set up as a ironclad, can't ever change it. These are things that are always adapted.
That's your opinion. 100 people that have voted for this, not the whole town, just like the lady said. It's not fair. You're picking on people, definitely picking on me. I can hear it all day long. Pretty simple. You have the crowd here, guarantee you they're all for me. There's nothing in this town but me. I'm the only one, me and Chris. Anybody else make money in this town? Answer me. Not allowed to or what? I'm trying to bring something in, you guys keep beating it up. You don't believe me? Ask them. Well, I can ask them. You're right. Have a nice night. Think about it. See you guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Jake.
Good written.
So, we had just a second, or I'll get you. We've had, a few people talk about the number of people that filled out surveys. Do I wish that everybody had done it? Yeah, sure do. And probably there are people in this room that didn't. We do the best that we can with what we have. We went to some effort to send out a flyer, to have events at different places, to post it on the town website, and still we got 108. So, the question of what should we do? Is it something that we need to go door to door to everybody's house and hopefully not get shot or attacked or whatever? And what is the level of responsibility of the people in town to answer the call, to this volunteer board. We absolutely want to hear what the town has to say, but when we get crickets, or we only get 108 instead of everybody, 108 is a decent number overall for surveys. We're doing the best we can with what we have. So that's where we're at. Sorry, Carl, go ahead.
Well, don't forget, I have chairs, we can get on now. I was thinking about why don't we have an industrial committee? Usually in a town, any size, there's big or small. There's somebody in the town that heads up an industrial park, and maybe you need a part in the zoning as an industrial park. If there's a piece of land we buy, they can set up businesses in the moment we don't have them about 25, 50. We just sat here singing on the ship and said the motor's dead riding on the river. I don't problem with taxes, but a lot of people do. They go to a lot of houses, they get problems. Can't pay the taxes, they can't get this big, they can't get that big. We do need, and you would start right over here, selectmen. Either is the board of the industrial development, or they appoint a board like your plan to set up an industrial park where you can have business. I haven't heard a thing about it, other than we don't have it in the word about 25 people. So if you get an industrial park, then that probably that's how the zone would apply to 25 people.
Yeah, thanks, Earl. So, I happen to work in the Littleton Industrial Park, and I'll make the point I made earlier that works because the town created a kind of public-private partnership. They bought the land, they developed it, they put town water and sewer out there, and said, hey, businesses like mine, you need to put in a 150,000 square foot building. This is a place for you. And my business did do that, not mine, but where I work. So this is just a piece to remember. It's not saying the infrastructure is everything, but it's a big deal for a lot of businesses. Some businesses don't need the infrastructure. Got it. But for a lot of them, that is a big piece. And so we can't just say, I wish more businesses would come to town. There's a piece of what kind of businesses do you want, and if those kind of businesses need that infrastructure, then you gotta, whether there's grants or something else, that's a whole other piece. And towns like Lancaster and Littleton, they have economic development committees, the towns that say, we want businesses, and we have this group, we have this grant funding, we're gonna do these things to encourage business in our town. So, and it works. We've seen what they do in those towns. That takes staff, and it takes grant writing, and it takes people to volunteer and do that. So, I'm all for it, but I can't do it. This.
You set up a board, you start out small, find out what business might be interested, then buy some land, put some money in it.
Yeah.
Get the fuel box.
So is he going to have a committee? Is it a volunteer?
And it's another piece of the town communicating to, whether it's the planning board about zoning or to the select board, like, hey, we want business, we need to create an economic development committee, and I, Earl, am willing to sign up and be on it. So, you'd be a great first member of the committee. Yeah, that's certainly fair to say. That's right. Yeah.
Well, you're even on the neighbor, you need something. And this is how this set up.
Yep, and that's.
Going to grow any bigger, which is fine, but no, we won't be here. Something's not done.
Well, I don't know. That's the feedback that we got, is that people, we like what we have here. I absolutely get that. What's that?
We didn't pose the question for development. Where are we going to develop any industry with that? But it's on the million to be out there. Put the garbage in there, that could have been an area.
Kleinschrodt can have it up.
Yeah, and the taxes and economic piece, I just say that to reiterate that there's a lot to it. And it needs people like you and Scott. You two are the first two members of the committee to help drive that. Figure out what are we going to do?
I'm going to follow up with Mr. Henry.
Yeah.
Because I didn't last time. We have an industrial park. We have an industrial park. We have industry in this town. The industry in this town has traditionally been in the southeast corner, where there's a biomass plant, there's a wood processing plant, there
there's a cement company, there's a gravel pit, there's a logging industry, there used to be a Harley Davidson dealership, there used to be a Dragon Theater, there's a cement block, kind of residential business, there's a shooting range. We already have that. We have an industrial park in this town.
In Bethlehem.
No. All within a mile of Chick's Industrial Park are all those industries.
Right.
Or within Chick's Industrial Park, those industries, and asphalt plants. Those are already here.
Yeah, no, I take your point.
I guess my question is, did the committee think about it? Or say, many times when you look at zoning in towns, this part of town is zoned for industry, this part is zoned for business, this part is zoned for residential.
Yep, there you go.
Was that looked at?
Yep, absolutely. And it's a piece that, like everything else, it sounds simple, like, right, we'll just have residential, okay, but, so where do you draw the line? And in some cases, it's a town, in a town, they might say, like, Lisbon, I think, their main drag is from this point to this point. So that's an easy way. There are some ways to do it. Talking about that particular part of town, one of the challenges is you drive that road, you're in Bethlehem all the way until you hit Littleton, right? So that's a challenge for us to say, this is the industrial district, it's not our town. You know, I understand you talk about
Chick doesn't own property in Dalton Road.
Chick's driveway goes back.
But Chick owns property in Dalton.
Absolutely, yeah. What I'm saying is, one of the examples of how people define industrial zones is along the road. And so in that place, I get that there are businesses there, but that part doesn't work. You can't say, well, yeah, here, because it's not our town. You gotta go back off that road. So it's not a simple answer, but to your question, we did certainly think about that.
And I give DES credit, because DES is why we haven't had a lot of problems in that industrial area of the towns of Bethlehem and Dalton. We haven't had a lot of issues with the industrial park presently in Dalton. And many of those things are because of the DES regulations that they have in place. Forest Lake has coexisted with industry for many, many years. And I think it will continue to coexist for many more years ahead. And I'm going to say one last piece and then I'm going to shut up. I've been up there long enough. One of the comments that was made last June or July, whenever we had that emergency town meeting here, there was a comment made by a gentleman who said, if we don't have zoning, and I'm paraphrasing, it wasn't word for word, but if we don't have zoning in this town, groups like Planned Parenthood and Black Lives Matter might just move in. And I was sitting in the back against that wall, and I almost couldn't believe what I just heard. And I hope, and I pray, that the people on this committee do not have that same feeling.
Absolutely not.
I hope not, because that was very offensive. I was shocked when I heard that. And the woman next to me said, did he really say that? Yes, he said. And that was not okay. And I want this right out front. Anybody who has those feelings, those racist feelings, might as well just pack up and go. We don't need that, no. This is already dividing the haves and the have-nots. This issue is dividing the haves and the have-nots. It's exactly what it's doing. And if this goes through, I'm going to live with it. If it's voted in, okay. It's voted in. I have to live with it. But we have an opportunity to think hard about whether we truly want this or not. This town has survived for 300 plus years. Without this, we have not had a whole lot of problems. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, just a second there. I appreciate that, Scott. And I think we've heard the comment before, like, well, it's been fine for us so far, right? And that probably is true. I don't know the situation of everybody in town. There may well be some people that are unhappy about a neighbor or something that happened. I can't speak to that. I will speak to something that almost happened in Littleton a couple of years ago. Some of you may know there was a big battery facility that was going to go in, and the Littleton fire department, I think it's fair to say, was terrified of it, because at this level, that thing goes, Earl's nodding his head, you don't put it out. You get out of the way and let it burn, and this was massive. And there were people on that same street that said, hey, it's a cul-de-sac, I live further down than that, so if that thing goes off, how am I getting out of here? In the end, that was rejected in Littleton. But that was something that, 10 years ago, was anybody thinking about that? These are things that do come up, and if we don't have zoning, and something like that comes up, it just happens, right? You didn't see it coming, but here it is, and now it's a problem. So things like that are absolutely possible. Sorry, go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, on your comment saying about the road, the industrial park.
Yeah.
Well, you work on a road that you can access to Lisbon. Dalton only has one road that is not banded. That's 142 that ends at the Connecticut River. You know what a banded road is? Sure. So you can't start an industry with a banded road. And Whitefield Industry Park, you can access that to the town of Jefferson. So there's more than one access as long as it's in the town.
Yeah, my point, Eric, was just that part of road that we're talking about is not actually Dalton. That was my only point.
None of them are actually, that's a state road, that's a federally funded road.
Right, but it is not in the town of Dalton, is what I meant to say. You're right, state road. Yeah, thanks.
Gordon Joe, Rich Road, Dalton. But at least 4 people who have expressed concern about the number 1 to 25. Is a better number 30 or 50, or is there a better number to assuage those concerns?
10,000. So, sorry. Okay, it was 0 and 10,000, so we're shooting for somewhere in between there.
No limit.
Infinite. Okay, there we go. Yeah, Earl.
That piece of land we're talking about, industrial park, is that zoned industrial park?
No.
What is it gonna be zoned? Residential?
It's the
It's not
same.
likely, it's already business there, that's why you could have it.
What's that?
It's already get business in that area. Maybe that could be zoned out as an industrial area. Not many people living there, I have that. The other side of the mountains on Slate, it's like here is Man's Hill Road. And then there's possible access out across above our stake out on over the mountain. That was the stake. No, I kept that line, just go around to it. Quick made it go to get them in and out, just nothing too fast, and if you stake them. But maybe I was thinking about doing something for industrial over there.
Yeah, it's one of those things like I talked about earlier. Scott asked if we absolutely thought about that. Should we have 1 zone, 2 zone?
Yeah.
And then you get into the where, and is it a stretch of road? Okay, well, we can't do that because it's not our town that it goes through. Is it a piece of property? Is it 3? It gets really complicated. And so it's not something that we ignored, but we were targeting having a very simple document here. If we add another zone, that you got pages in here too that gets that much more complicated, and then feel like, well, I want to do something. It's hard, and it's.
But where we're going at it, that area over there, we just like the main street in Lowell, the main street in Whitefield, residential zoning. This is all about basic. You can think small, store in the town, grocery store, filling station, a couple of mechanics. But no, nothing for business.
Right, and again, that was the feedback that we got, that's what people want, is what we have now. And it's,
I don't think I've ever been approached with the other angle we're talking about, right? The other angle we're very fortunate to talk about below, that we do need to do something, and you need to start at the ground level, very low. Like ladies and men, whatever you want to be. You're gonna have to say, okay.
starting out. If you recruit some more, that'd be great, but.
I don't invite you, and it may not be on the right, you know, I'm old. I'm just giving you a couple of hints, comments, but, you know, I'm too old, my dad didn't have to wake me up.
Never too old, though. Never too old. Yeah, I appreciate that. And as, just a second, Pam, you know, I said it before, I'll say it again. This document can be changed. If it gets enacted in June and people see something we missed or have another thought, let's put it on the ballot in March and make an edit. Okay? It doesn't take any more than that. So I don't want anybody to feel like this is a set in stone thing. It just isn't. So it shouldn't be part of the discussion. Yeah.
I guess overall, okay, my question is, with all this extra work that zoning will be, and as Carol stated, they don't have time to do what they're doing now, how is this going to be done in a timely fashion for people that are waiting for a decision on permits?
So the extra work you're talking about is what?
Well, approving the permits, checking out the permits, make sure that they're following the codes we're supposed to.
Yeah, so like.
About 20 over 3 years, so that's manageable.
And as if zoning comes in, and your numbers increase, and you have repeatedly mentioned you don't have time to do what you need to do for this town, how will you do that?
So Pam, I think the main thing is that what we've shown here, our data is the build rate for this town is 20 or so over 3 years. Okay, that's what it is. So if zoning goes in, that demand doesn't go up. I mean, maybe a few a year doesn't.
People will just do their thing anyway and not bother.
Well, that's a possibility, but it's like any other law in the state. Like if there's a law in place and you break it, then there's potential violation.
Who's your patrol group that's going to go around and make sure people are following?
That's a position for the town to take on whether, you know, I think you said some of the fines are discretionary, so it's going to depend on how egregious things are.
But who will be checking it out? Will the select people?
So there will not be a building inspector. That's some people have asked about what's the cost of zoning. The cost of zoning is nothing because there's no building inspector.
There's
Which
a
part?
lot of administrative work, the permits, processing. That's going to cost money.
Right. So as a town, as a taxpayer, for you and I, we're not going to hire somebody to do this, so that there's no cost from that. The fee at the moment is $0. If the fee needs to be a little bit higher, it's $10.
No fee for permits. Isn't the idea to generate some income to cover those costs?
Okay, different question.
Okay, all right. Just thought. Thank you.
All right, so we're at 8:30. Do we have anything else online?
Just the point that you made that without zoning, people in town have no say, so that's
Right. Yeah, so the point from online is without zoning, all of us that own property in the town, we have no say about what happens next door, right? And it's easy to say if you've got established neighbors and they're there, you know, yeah, nothing's going to change, but you know, my neighbor, the property next door to me just sold, it's just land. So what are they going to do there? I don't know. I hope they're just going to build a house, but I don't know. So these are things that, you know, others have problems with.
If you have a problem with your neighbors doing something, buy their land so they don't buy it. Problem solved.
Yeah, there you go, Eric. I've thought of that many times myself. It's a nice thing if you got the money to do it.
But if you don't, so you can file a complaint so they can't do anything, is that right? That's basically what you're saying. If you have a complaint about it, you can stop it.
If what your neighbor's proposing to do is not permitted by the zoning ordinance, and you complain about it, yes, something can be done, but if what your neighbor is doing is something that is permitted by the zoning ordinance.
That's not what he said.
Well.
He said that he hopes that his neighbor builds what he wants there.
No, he said he hopes his neighbor builds a single-family home there because that would be conducive to.
Did he just not say that?
He did say that.
Yeah, well, he hopes they build what he wants.
Yes.
As opposed to a chicken farm or any other thing.
If they don't build what he wants, he doesn't have a complaint to make them do something else at this point.
I think you'll find New Hampshire has a law that you can put a farm anywhere you want.
New Hampshire has.
Town of Lancaster.
New Hampshire has a very detailed farming law that doesn't quite say that, but does allow farming as a general rule.
Maybe you should have said a lithium battery storage.
Okay, lithium battery storage next door to me. Other questions? Okay, but if we don't have any more online or in person, then at 8:30 we'll call this. As I mentioned earlier, we have at least one edit on the changing the 5 to a 1, and so for that we will need to call another meeting, and you will all see that information. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate everybody that came up to speak and have their say. I really appreciate that.